Huh. Interesting. Ah, you guys are back again. How are you guys doing today? Good? I'm glad to hear that. I don't know what to say. Yesterday I meant to upload a video, but my day just got out of my hands and I don't know what happened. I'm gonna be honest. But today I've decided to make up for it by making a very special video just for you. What is this video gonna be about? Let's get into it. Oh yeah. Welcome back to my story, everyone. Sorry for the little interruption. I decided to change the pace of today's episode a little bit. We've got a new location so that you're not just focusing on me sitting down. What's today's story about? Very important question. What are we doing here? Well, the other day, a good friend of mine, Naomi, she asked me a question that really got me thinking. If I could, would I be able to list or name every single battle from World War II? Now, if you guys know me, you know that I'm a huge World War II nerd. I'm a history lover. I love all kinds of military history, World War One, World War II, Vietnam, all the fancy stuff. So, if you follow me over here, I decided to dedicate a little bit of time to creating this list, a detailed, kind of brief summary of every single battle from all the years of World War II. Now, this may seem very nerdy, a very nerdy kind of thing to do, listing every single battle from World War II, but you know, I'm not gonna let that affect me. I don't really care what people think about my list. I like my list. So let's get into it. But first, I might need something for this. Ah, there we go. We're gonna use this marker as a pointer, because I can't really find anything else at the moment. Let's get into it, everyone. So, 1939, invasion of Poland, very important, beginning of World War II. I understand that there were a couple of other things that kind of led up to World War II, such as the Anschluss, which is when the German army took over Austria, and then of course you had the Spanish Civil War, and you had all kinds of things. But for the purpose of this list, we're going to go with the invasion of Poland as the start of our timeline for the Second World War. Battle of Westerplatte, 1st of September 1939, beginning of World War II, kind of got everything rolling into motion. Next on our list is the Battle of Azura, again, the 1st to the 7th of September 1939. Again, another part, it's part of the invasion of Poland. Siege of Warsaw, again, part of the invasion of Poland, went from the 8th to the 28th of September. Very long. Lots of people, ended up going through hard times during the Siege of Warsaw. The Germans cut off the city from receiving supplies. Then, this is something that isn't really talked about a lot. The Soviet invasion of East Poland on the 17th of September 1939. Now, when you ask any other kind of history person, well, any kind of historian, they will often bring up that the Germans invaded Poland, and that's about it. But it was actually the joint cooperation of the Germans and the Soviets who took Poland. Before World War II, the Nazis and the Soviets had signed something called the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which basically meant that the Soviet Union could take the east of Poland and the Germans could take the west of Poland, and that's how it would go. They wouldn't argue with each other, they wouldn't have disputes, they knew what they wanted. So, Soviet invasion of East Poland, 17th of September 1939. After that, on my list, I included the surrender of Modlin, 29th of September 1939. That was pretty much the end of the invasion of Poland. Next on our list, we have September to October 1939, the Saar Offensive. This was kind of a precursor to the invasion of France. This was the land between Germany and France that the French had pretty much demilitarized. Am I thinking of something else? I might have. I made this list on Tuesday and it's Thursday, so now I have to try and remember why I put these things there. So, French Saar Offensive, the 7th to the 16th of September, so right around the same time frame as the invasion of Poland. Invasion of Poland was from the 1st of September to the 29th, and the French Saar Offensive was from the 7th. I don't know why I keep saying 17. I don't know. 7th to the 16th of September. Battle of the Atlantic. I put that there because that is 1939. That's when it started, but that's not where it ended. If I'm not mistaken, Battle of the Atlantic went on for about 3 years, ended in 4 years, 1943. And so I put Battle of the Atlantic, and looking back on this list, I did forget a couple of things, like the German movement into countries such as the Lebensraum, the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. I made this list a bit short, not so much that I wanted to forget some battles, but more so that I could fit the whole timeline of World War II onto this whiteboard. So, yeah, I did miss a couple battles, but I'll bring them up later. So, let's move on to 1940. 1940, we have the invasion of Denmark and Norway. Operation Weserübung, 9th of April. That was the invasion of Denmark. Now, if you ask any historian, they will always talk about how the French surrendered within like 6 weeks of the German invasion and the French gave up so quick, but they never talk about what happened in Denmark. Operation Weserübung, 9th of April, the invasion of Denmark, lasted 6 hours. The French at least held the Germans back for 6 weeks. Meanwhile, the Danish couldn't even hold the Germans back for an entire day. You could watch like 2 movies in the time that it took the Germans to invade Denmark. So, I don't know, something I like to bring up a lot, invasion of Denmark, 6 hours. Yeah, very interesting. So, let's move on. Battle of Oslo, that was part of the invasion of Norway. So, Battle of Oslo, 8th of April. Battle of Narvik. Narvik was a port town in Norway where the German Navy kind of held the town hostage. So, Battle of Narvik, 9th of April to the 8th of June, lasted quite a while. Battle of Trondheim, 9th of April, can't really remember when it ended. Yeah, the way I dated some of these things is a bit weird. I don't know why I did that. Sometimes I do things and I look back and I'm like, what was I doing? Let's move on. Invasion of France. So, as I told you, the Saar Offensive in 1939 was a precursor to the invasion of France. Invasion of France, very interesting. After World War I, the French military had been preparing for a scenario where the Germans decided to go to war again. So they spent 20 odd years trying to rebuild the military. They built this line of defensive bunkers called the Maginot Line. And the whole purpose of the Maginot Line was that it was supposed to keep the Germans out of France. The Maginot Line had machine gun bunkers, it had telecommunication wires, it had all sorts of these fancy things, fancy in like a 1930s kind of standard, because the French legitimately thought that if another World War were to break out again, it would have been like World War I. Trench warfare, armies going at each other across no man's land. Now, this time the Germans had invented a new kind of warfare called Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg, very famous, very fast. And the point I'm trying to get at is that the French had spent so much time worrying about the Germans getting into France that they didn't think about the country next to them, Belgium. The Maginot Line only went across France. It did not go into Belgium. So what the Germans did, and this was very smart, was they went around the Maginot Line and they started attacking the French from behind. Imagine that. You spend 20 years trying to develop the system of bunkers and trenches to stop the Germans from getting in, and they go around it. That's like me building a door to stop the snow from getting in my house, and then I leave the rest of the house unbuilt. Very stupid. So, invasion of France, 10th of May to the 25th of June. Invasion of Belgium, again, you had German panzers moving through Belgium. That's how they got into France. Invasion of Belgium, 10th of May, so again, kind of overlaps with the invasion of France. Invasion of Luxembourg, 10th of May, ends on the 14th. Invasion of the Netherlands, 10th of May. Battle of Hanet, or Hanet. Battle of Hanet, very interesting, was considered one of the earliest major tank conflicts of World War II. You had the French going up against the Germans, very heavy losses on the German side. Battle of Hanet took place on the 10th to the 14th of May, so 4 days of tank fighting. Not many people do talk about this, but the French had very powerful tanks, like the Char B, the Char B1, but the Germans had very quick tanks. Now, you can have a very powerful tank, but if your tank isn't very fast, it's not going to mean anything, because you can shoot as many tanks as you want. All it takes is one tank to drive right behind you, and boom, you're done. So, Battle of Hanet, very interesting. If you've noticed anything so far, we've got the 10th, the 10th, the 10th, the 10th, the 10th. During World War II, especially in the early years, when Blitzkrieg was still effective, the German tank columns moved so incredibly fast that the infantry struggled to actually keep up with them. So they could invade multiple places in like the same day. And you had so many panzers, because remember, this was early in the war. The Germans had just remilitarized a couple years ago. They had time to expand their army. They had time to rebuild. So they had hundreds, and they could afford to go to 4 different countries all on the same day. So, next, the Battle of France. Very important. This is when the Germans were actually fighting in France. Went from the 13th to the 24th of May. So France took a total of 6 weeks to fall to the Germans, and part of that reason was as to why it took so long is because obviously the French had been prepared for this, but also because the British were there. The British had sent the British Expeditionary Forces and they had been in France about as early as 1939. So now we get to the evacuation of Dunkirk. Dunkirk, being a small French coastal town, Dunkirk was very famous because the British lost a lot of equipment. A lot of things were left behind by the British, all in the matter to get their own troops back home, 26th of May to the 7th of June. Dunkirk, not really remembered very favorably. It was a very big mess. You had the British Navy calling on little fishing trawls to come help bring British soldiers back, especially after they said that the British, were there to peacekeep, and now they're being driven out of France. So, not very nice. And then, once the British managed to get all of their troops back into the United Kingdom, begins the Battle of Britain, or Operation Sea Lion. Operation Sea Lion was the German bombing of the United Kingdom. The Germans sent hundreds of bombers, Messerschmitt Bf 109s, Stukas, Heinkels, basically just to try and bomb the ever-living daylights out of the UK. The British obviously responded with the Royal Air Force. They managed to fight off the Germans, but unfortunately there were some cases where the Germans did manage to get in and bomb places like London. So, Battle of Britain, 10th of July to the 31st of October, very long time. And then, so the Blitz, I guess you could also call the Battle of Britain Operation Sea Lion, and then I guess you could have / the Blitz, all part, except the Blitz ran into September 1939 or 1940. Anyway, North African campaign begins in 1940. The Italians and the Germans are responsible for this, and I just put here June to December. Very easy to remember. Let's just get to 1941. 1941, invasion of Greece, 6th of April. The reason why I start off with the invasion of Greece here is because it's very interesting. The Germans weren't the one who started the invasion of Greece. It was actually the Italians. Benito Mussolini had tried to invade Greece, but the Italian army wasn't very good, and they were getting their asses handed to them. So Benito Mussolini called up his good friend Adolf Hitler, and the Germans invade Greece on the 6th of April. Germans managed to push Greek forces all the way into Albania. Now, incorrectly, I accidentally called this the invasion of Albania. No, the Germans did not actually invade Albania until 1943, 44, somewhere around then. So, Germans basically did what the Italians couldn't. They took Greece. So, again, the invasion of Albania, kind of a misnomer. It wasn't really much of an invasion as it was the Germans just pushing the Greeks back as far as Albania. Now, invasion of Yugoslavia. People always talk about the Eastern Front happening in 1941, but they oftentimes forget about the invasion of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, formerly known as Serbia, now known as Serbia again. Very, very rocky history there. I'm not even going to touch that. Invasion of Yugoslavia, 6th of April. Battle of Greece, the 20th to the 30th of April. The Germans managed to take the entire country of Greece. Yeah, not much to say about that. Battle of Libya. So Battle of Libya is part of the North African campaign that had started back in 1940. Battle of Libya, 31st of March to the 15th of April. The Siege of Tobruk. Now, here I have said April to November 1941. The only reason why I said April to November is because since it's in the 1941 category, I didn't want to say April to June 1942. That just wouldn't look very nice. So siege of Tobruk, April to November 1941. Let's move on. Battle of Crete. Battle of Crete, very famous. German paratroopers, Fallschirmjägers, dropping into the small Greek island of Crete that was being protected or defended by British forces. Now, the Fallschirmjäger did take many casualties, but the Battle of Crete was a German success. Fallschirmjäger captured a ton of British troops on the island of Crete, 20th of May to the 1st of June. Operation Barbarossa. There we are. There's the Eastern Front I was just talking about. Operation Barbarossa, 22nd of June, that's when it starts. Operation Barbarossa was at the beginning, at the early part of Operation Barbarossa, the Russians were actually they were kind of caught off guard because remember that in 1939 they signed the Nazi-Soviet pact, which meant that the Germans weren't going to do anything funny to the Russians. It was basically a friendship pact. The Russians said that the Nazis are our friends, and the Nazis said that the Soviets are our friends. So Operation Barbarossa happens, and the Russians are caught off guard. Leading up to World War II, the Russians had actually gone through an event called the Purge. Not the movie series, no. This was different. Political officers, military officers, political members, Joseph Stalin was very paranoid. Let me just say that. Joseph Stalin was incredibly paranoid. So, before World War II even began, he was afraid that his own officers, his own political party members, were trying to kill him. So he had the NKVD round up all of the people he suspected, and they effectively tortured people into giving false testimonies, and then they would kill them. Half of the Soviet army's high command had been executed in these purges. So when the Germans invaded in 1941, the Russians were caught very much off guard, and the Germans could just go through. The Germans managed to get through a lot of the Soviet Union because, again, the Russians didn't have many commanders, so the troops didn't know what the hell to do. You don't have any orders coming through because the guy who gave you orders is dead. Joseph Stalin actually spent 2 weeks alone, isolating himself in his office when he heard the news that the Germans were invading the Soviet Union. Very interesting. Battle of Bialystok, Minsk, 22nd of June, again, is part of Operation Barbarossa. Minsk is in Ukraine. Germans got through Ukraine without a problem. As a matter of fact, when the Germans came to Ukraine, a lot of Ukrainians actually welcomed the Germans because of what they had been through under the Soviets. Soviets had been starving the Ukrainians. They took Ukrainian farms and they converted them into social farms, like communal farms. Like instead of a farmer making crops for his family and his community, now it just went to the Soviet Union. So a lot of Ukrainians were suffering. So when the Germans show up, lots of Ukrainians actually welcomed the Germans as liberators. There are a couple pictures you can find of like Ukrainians welcoming the Germans with open arms. Not all of the Ukrainians welcomed the Germans with open arms. I feel like that should be very apparent. Lots of Ukrainians were still skeptical of the Germans, but yeah. Germans actually helped reopen a lot of churches in Ukraine because the Soviets were very much anti-religion. Judaism, apparently. I don't know what's going on with that. So lots of people liked the Germans being there because the Germans were fighting the Soviets. Anyway, Battle of Smolensk, again, part of Operation Barbarossa in Ukraine. Anyway, Battle of Leningrad. Now, I call it the Battle of Leningrad here, but it's more of like a siege of Leningrad. Lots of people ended up dying. The Germans had basically cut off all the outside world to Leningrad. so people ended up starving. Lots of cases of cannibalism, kind of icky. Battle of Kiev, again, part of Operation Barbarossa, early parts. Operation Barbarossa, 22nd of June. Battle of Minsk, 22nd of June. Battle of Smolensk, June to September. Battle of Leningrad, July to September. Battle of Kiev, the 23rd of August to the 26th of September. Battle of Moscow, 30th of September. This is the most... If you were to talk to any World War II historian about the Battle of Moscow, they will tell you that the Germans were this close to taking over the Soviet Union. If I remember correctly, they were about 28 kilometers away from Moscow. So if the Germans had just stuck to the message, or had stuck to the mission, if they had just taken Moscow, the entire Soviet Union could have fallen to the Germans. But, so, Battle of Moscow, 30th of September, the Germans could have done it. A lot of fighting. Obviously, the Soviets didn't want the Germans to get to Moscow. So you had lots of civilians fighting, Soviet Union fighting, guerrilla fighters. Germans were this close, but then they blew it. But I'll talk about why they blew it later. Operation Crusader. Operation Crusader, part of the North African campaign. Not much to say about Operation Crusader from my side. 18th of November to the 30th of December. If you want to learn more about Operation Crusader, it was a part of the North African campaign, British versus the Germans. Americans weren't involved in this part of the war. Operation Crusader, 18th of November to the 30th of December. Americans will make that later. Attack on Pearl Harbor. There we go. Attack on Pearl Harbor. This is when the United States got involved. The Imperial Japanese Navy, a couple of Zeros, flew to the Hawaiian military base at Pearl Harbor, bombed just about everything. Yeah, and the Americans declared war on Japan. Then you have the Battle of Malaya. The Americans weren't involved in the Battle of Malaya. This was more so a Japanese imperial thing, kind of like with the Japanese expansion of the empire in the 1930s. So, Battle of Malaya, 8th of December. Battle of Hong Kong, 8th of December. Hong Kong, guarded by the British. Lots of British soldiers stationed at Hong Kong, but they were all captured by the Japanese on the 8th of December. Philippines campaign, December 1941. Again, Japanese conquering the Philippines. Let's move on to 1942. Battle of Rzhev. Kind of early, still part of early. This was the borderline between the early part of Operation Barbarossa, where the Germans were still taking a lot of Soviet territory, and 8th of January to the 20th of April. Battle of Singapore, 8th of February. Battle of Manila, 2nd of June. Now, not much to say from my side. Battle of Gazala, part of the North African campaign. Battle of Tobruk. Now, I told you earlier, Siege of Tobruk here. The reason why I couldn't say April to when it actually ended is because it actually ended in 1942. If you watched my first video about my great-grandfather, you would know that my great-grandfather, William Oliver Butler, part of the Union Defense Force, was captured at Tobruk on the 21st of June, 1942. Battle of El Alamein, the 1st to the 27th of July. Battle of Midway, 4th to the 7th of June. Battle of Guadalcanal, 7th of August. Battle of Tarawa, Battle of Bloody Ridge. Now, this is where the war started to go wrong for the Germans. The Battle of Stalingrad. Battle of Stalingrad, very controversial, very controversial in the history community. A lot of people say that if the Germans hadn't invaded Stalingrad, they could have won the war. I'm one of those people, I kind of think that if Hitler had just stuck to taking Moscow, he could have won World War II. Not something I want, but it is something that could have happened. The only reason Adolf Hitler decided to invade Stalingrad is because of its namesake, Stalingrad. The only reason Hitler decided to invade the Soviet automotive capital, where all the factories were, was because it was named after Stalin, and he wanted to go after Stalin's pride. So he invaded Stalingrad on the 23rd of August, 1942. This is kind of where the war starts going wrong for the Germans. This is considered a very big blunder to some people. If I'm not mistaken, the average lifespan of a soldier at Stalingrad was 24 seconds. Or is it minutes? Again, the whole point is that they had very short lifespans at Stalingrad. That's just how bloody it was. It was horrible. Conditions were terrible. Germans were sieging the city, invading the city. Not really nice. Operation Uranus, Soviet operation on the 19th of November, 1942. Again, Soviets fighting Germans. What else is new? Operation Torch. Now, Operation Torch is still a part of the North African campaign. Operation Torch. This is in my mind. This one's a bit more famous because this time you had the Americans participating in a large-scale invasion. Operation Torch, 8th of November 1942. Americans were there as well, alongside the English. And there may have been a couple more battles that I missed in 1942, but again, I have to keep this brief. I have to keep it short because, again, not a lot of space on this piece of paper. So, yeah, 1943, I had to cut back really a lot. I only included like 4 very famous battles from 1943. 1943, in and of itself, wasn't really not a lot came out of 1943 other than like the German retreat, so that's why it's so short. And I had to make space for 1944 and 1945. So 1943, first thing on my list, Battle of Kharkov. This is when the Germans started to get, well, actually, before the Battle of Kharkov, 1943, Battle of Stalingrad ends in February. So the Germans were getting pushed back out of the Soviet Union. And first thing on my list is the Battle of Kharkov, February to March. Battle of Kharkov in Ukraine. Russians started pushing the Germans back. Battle of Kursk, 5th of July. Battle of Kursk, also known as Operation Citadel, was a large-scale tank battle between the... Hey, what the hell was that? Battle of Kursk, Operation Citadel, was a large-scale tank battle between the Germans and the Soviets. You had tanks like the Tigers, Panthers, Panzers, going up against Soviet T-34s, T-34-85s, all kinds of Soviet tanks. I don't know all the Soviet tank names, okay? So, go research your own damn Soviet tanks. Invasion of Sicily. This is when the Allies started to invade mainland Europe. Well, this is when the Americans actually decided to show up. So, invasion of Sicily, 10th of July, 1943. Invasion of Italy, 3rd of September, 1943. Interestingly enough, I like the beginning parts of the invasion of Italy. The Allies took a while. They took so long that some of the Germans actually started making like predictions where they said that the Allies would only actually get out of Italy by like 1946. That's how slow the Allies were. Now, at the bottom of the list, I included the Battle of Bougainville. Battle of Bougainville, 1943. Just another part of the Pacific Theater. I would motivate you to research it yourself if you want to learn it. It's very interesting. Yamamoto, head of the Japanese Navy, he dies at Bougainville. His plane crashed and he was in it. It would be kind of funny if his plane crashed and he wasn't in it and he still died. Anyway, let's move on to the last part. Now, I'm just going to quickly shorten you guys a little bit so you can actually see what the hell's happening here. So, 1944. Battle of Monte Cassino, January to May. Battle of Monte Cassino was very interesting because you had not only just British and American forces, you had Polish, you had South African forces. Yeah, very interesting. Liberation of Rome, 4th of June, 1944. Not much to say about that. Allies took Rome back from the Germans. Operation Overlord, also known as D-Day. People have asked me what the D in D-Day stands for. It doesn't actually really stand for anything. The D in D-Day, we don't actually know what it means. So, Operation Overlord, or D-Day, 6th of June, 1944. Yes, there were airborne drops on the night before, the 5th of June, but the actual invasion of Normandy was on the 6th of June, 1944. Oh, Operation Overlord, D-Day, 6th of June. About 16 D-Days after D-Day, so you had like D-Day plus 1, D-Day plus 2, D-Day plus 3, and now there are a couple of other little battles that happened after D-Day, like the Battle of Normandy, Battle of Carentan, Battle of Saint-Mary-Glace, but again, I had to leave them out because I do have to make space for all of this. So, Operation Bagration, 22nd of June. The Warsaw Uprising, this is when the tide really started turning for the Germans. The Polish held an uprising in Warsaw, and lots of people the Polish didn't do very well, but it kind of inspired people to start, pushing back against the Germans. This is when you really started seeing, mass, the Germans being pushed back more and more. At this point, Warsaw Uprising, Liberation of Paris, 19th of August. This is when the Germans were kicked out of Paris by the Allies. Then 19th of August, 1944. Operation Market Garden. Very interesting story there. So, large airborne drop, not very successful by the Allies. Matter of fact, Market Garden was a large-scale defeat of the Allies by the Germans. Mostly because the conditions were just not right. The Allies went in with an expectation that the German army was weak. So Operation Market Garden, not a success. Lots of British paratroopers captured. American paratroopers were captured. Not a good time. Return to the Philippines, 20th of October. Americans come back, take back the Philippines. Battle of Leyte Gulf, 23rd of October. And the final one I have here is the Battle of the Bulge. Battle of the Bulge started in 1944, went into 1945. As a matter of fact, for the first time in this list, I actually listed the Battle of the Bulge in 1944 and the Battle of the Bulge in 1945. Battle of the Bulge was when the Allies went into Belgium, and this is when, on the Western Front, the Germans started getting pushed back even more, back into Germany. Battle of the Bulge, very famous for the snow. It was winter, snowing everywhere, lots of cases of people freezing to death. Yeah. So, 1945. This is the last year on my list. Battle of the Bulge, as I just told you, ends in February 1945. Germans get pushed back into Germany. Battle of Bastogne. The Battle of Bastogne is part of the Battle of the Bulge. Battle of the Bulge is kind of a nickname for the Ardennes offensive. Ardennes is a forest area in Belgium. Very interesting. So, Vistula Oder offensives, 12th of January to the 2nd of February. This is when the Soviets started pushing the Germans back into Germany. East Prussian offensive, 13th of January to the 10th of Feb. Again, this is another case of where the Russians are pushing the Germans back into Germany at a much faster rate than the Allies were, or the other Allies. Battle of Luzon, 9th of January. Battle of Manila, 3rd of March. Both of these were in the Pacific theaters. Manila, very hectic. I actually put an Instagram post out talking about the massacre at Manila. Japanese forces did not treat the Filipinos very nice. Not at all. If you actually read the story of what happened at Manila, you cannot look at the Japanese the same way again. Let's just say that, yeah, the Japanese deserve to get nuked. That's just my opinion, but anyway. Operation Veritable, February 1945. This was on the European theater. Operation Plunder, 23rd of March again, European theater. Another operation that pushed the Germans back into Germany. Battle of Iwo Jima, very famous for the Marine Corps landing. The picture of the Marines putting up the flag, that was at Iwo Jima. That happened on the 19th of February to the 26th of March. Interesting fact, to this day, Marines who are stationed at Iwo Jima collect small parts of the black beaches at Iwo Jima to bring home, just as like part of their heritage. It's actually pretty cool. I wish I could meet a Marine who has some volcanic beach sand. Now, Battle of Berlin. This is when the Soviets managed to push the Germans right into Berlin. Very famous, very unfortunate for the Germans there, but from the 16th of April to the 2nd of May, street fighting. Yeah, very, very messy. You had lots of civilian casualties. And then after, of course, when Berlin fell, you had cases like the rape of Berlin, where Russians just went out and assaulted as many German women as they can. I've heard stories now recently where Soviet officers after the Battle of Berlin would go around issuing these kind of, they were giving these things to the Russian soldiers that were like these notes that said, take German women as your war trophy. Very icky, very not good. Yeah. I don't know how true that is. I have to do some more research on that. But Battle of Berlin, 16th of April to the 2nd of May. This was the last battle. Well, kind of the last battle. Again, you had some other battles after World War II had ended, like the Battle of Itter Castle, where the Americans and the Wehrmacht fought off the Waffen-SS at the Itter Castle in Austria. But for now, Battle of Berlin, end of the war in Europe. Now, back to the Pacific Theater. Here we have the Battle of Okinawa. The Americans are starting to push the Japanese closer and closer back to Japan. But Okinawa, especially, was very bad. if I can just be honest, 1945 was not a very good year to be in. 1945, Okinawa. You had citizens who would throw themselves off the cliffs at the beach because the Japanese had told them that the Americans were going to come and just murder everyone. So you had lots of women and children, especially, would throw themselves off the cliffs at Okinawa, basically because they thought that when the Americans came, they were going to be assaulted and murdered. Very, very tragic. I don't like talking about cases where innocent civilians get caught in the crossfire, but war is bad. War, for some of the good things that war has given us, like advancements in technology, war has a lot of consequences. People get caught in the crossfire. It's bad. It's horrible, actually. So, Battle of Okinawa, the 1st of April to the 22nd of June. And then, last thing on my list here, very famous, the nuking of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I feel like everyone and their mother knows what the nuking of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was. America dropped the Fat Man and the Little Boy nuclear bombs on 2 cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Interesting fact, Nagasaki is actually the most Catholic city in Japan. Yeah. August 6th, 1945, and the Japanese ended up surrendering on the 2nd of September, 1945. Yeah. This has been a very, again, as I said, I left a couple battles out because unfortunately I couldn't fit all of them onto this sheet of paper. So some battles did get left out, like Czechoslovakia, the invasion of Romania. Yeah, a couple places had to get left out, a couple battles, but I feel like at the bigger picture, this is about as close as like a full timeline that I could create. Again, the only reason I did this is because someone asked me if I was able to, from memory, would I be able to name every single battle from World War II? And these are about as many battles as I can remember. Yeah. Interesting, huh? It got a bit somber towards the end. I'm gonna admit. I don't know why it got so somber. I just don't like talking about civilian casualties. Yeah. Oh, thanks for watching my YouTube video, everyone. I hope you really liked this one. I'm very passionate about history, so I like talking about it. I hope you like talking about it as well. Yeah. If you liked today's video, please leave a like and subscribe. My voice cracked. We're going to pretend that didn't happen. Leave a comment down below of anything you found interesting in this video or just any part of World War II that you would like me to answer in another video. But this is where I'm going to end it. I would like to get out of this room at some point today. So, God bless. I love you all. Keep being yourself. Okay, goodbye.